Everyone laughed when she said she was buying the Henderson place. The black sedans came on a Tuesday, 3 of them, crawling up the dirt road like beetles approaching a corpse. State plates. Agricultural Department seals on the doors. The whole town of Millbrook watched from behind their curtains as the inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand. Faces already set in that government scowl that said someone was about to get fined, shut down, or run out of business. They weren't prepared for what they saw. The first inspector, a man named Harold Vance, who had spent 30 years looking at cornfields and soybean rows, actually dropped his clipboard. It hit the dust with a sound like a gunshot. The second inspector, a younger woman from the EPA, took 3 steps forward, then stopped, her mouth opening and closing like a fish thrown onto dry land. The third man didn't say anything at all. He just reached for his phone and started taking pictures. His hands shaking so badly, the first 3 came out blurred, because in front of them, rising 14 feet into the Oklahoma sky from soil that had been declared biologically dead 14 years ago, stood a wall of corn, not ordinary corn. This was something out of a dream or a memory or a story told by grandmothers in the dark. The stalks were thick as a man's wrist, striped with silver and deep violet. The ears hung heavy, wrapped in pale blue husks that caught the morning light like lanterns. And the soil beneath them, the same soil that had killed every crop planted on the Henderson place since 2009, was dark, rich, and alive with worms. Harold Vance bent down. He scooped up a handful of dirt, brought it to his nose, and smelled something he hadn't smelled in decades. Life. Who owns this land? He whispered. Girl named Maya Torres, said the sheriff, who had followed the sedans up the road. She's 22 years old. Bought it 6 months ago with $800 and a broken tractor. Everyone told her she was crazy. Harold looked at the corn. Then he looked at the dead fields surrounding it, the brown, withered acres owned by experienced farmers with good equipment and college degrees. He looked back at the blue corn. She's not crazy, he said. She's either a genius or she's got a secret, and I need to know which one. 6 months earlier, Maya Torres had stood in the office of Millbrook County Bank with her hands shaking so hard she had to hide them in the pockets of her late father's jacket. The jacket smelled like diesel and tobacco, 2 things her father had loved, and 2 things that always made her feel like he was still standing beside her, telling her to hold her chin up. She was 22 years old, 5'3", with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. She had $843 in her checking account, a degree in agricultural science that she had paid for by working double shifts at a diner, and a dream that everyone in the room thought was a joke. I want to buy the Henderson property, she said. The loan officer, a man named Bill Kowalski, who had known Maya since she was in diapers, didn't even look up from his computer. You want to buy Henderson's? Yes, sir. Bill finally looked up. He took off his glasses. He cleaned them on his tie. He put them back on. Then he laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but the kind of laugh a man gives when a child tells him she wants to be an astronaut. Maya, sweetheart, that land is poison. Has been since old man Henderson died in 2009. Nothing grows there. Nothing has grown there in 14 years. The soil tests came back dead. The water table's contaminated. Half the county thinks it's cursed, and the other half knows it's just bad land. The bank foreclosed on it 3 years ago, and we haven't been able to give it away. I know, Maya said. That's why I have $800. I know you can't sell it. I'm asking you to let me have it. I'll pay the back taxes. I'll fix the fences. I'll bring it back to life. Bill looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the other men in the room. 2 bank board members who had driven in from Tulsa, both of them wearing suits that cost more than Maya's car. They were already shaking their heads. Maya, your daddy was a good man, Bill said softly. Best soybean farmer this county ever saw. But he's gone now, and that farm took him just like it took Henderson. That land is cursed. Ask anyone. Henderson's wife left him after the third failed crop. His son drank himself to death in that barn. And your own father, my father, died of a heart attack, Maya said, her voice steady even though her eyes were burning. Not a curse, a heart attack. And before he died, he wrote something in his journal. He wrote that the Henderson place wasn't cursed. He wrote that it was sleeping. He wrote that someone just needed to wake it up. The room went quiet. One of the board members, a man with a red face and a gold watch, leaned forward. Your father was a fine farmer, Maya, but he was also a dreamer. That land is worthless. The EPA flagged it. The soil pH is so low it could etch glass. There's something in the groundwater, probably runoff from the old chemical plant upstream that closed in '08. We can't in good conscience let a 22-year-old girl throw her life away on 40 acres of dust and regret. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She smoothed it on Bill's desk. It was a handwritten note yellowed at the edges in her father's looping script. The land isn't dead, Mija. It's angry. It's been hurt. But hurt things can heal if someone loves them enough. The Henderson place holds a secret. I never found it, but you will. You're braver than I ever was. Bill read it twice. Then he folded it and handed it back. Maya, I loved your father like a brother. But this is grief talking. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearer than I ever have, Maya said. She pulled out her checkbook. $800. Plus, I'll assume the tax debt. I'll sign whatever waiver you want. If I fail, you lose nothing. If I succeed, she paused, if I succeed, you'll have to explain to the state why you gave away the most valuable farmland in the county for $800. The board members laughed. Bill didn't. He looked at Maya's eyes, her father's eyes, and saw something there that made him reach for the paperwork. You're going to regret this, he said. Probably, Maya said. But I'd rather regret trying than regret walking away. The Henderson place looked worse in person than it did in Maya's nightmares. She drove her father's old Ford pickup up the dirt road on a Thursday morning in March, the sky the color of old dishwater, the wind carrying the smell of rust and dead things. The gate hung from one hinge, screeching like a dying animal when she pushed it open. The farmhouse was a skeleton, windows boarded, porch sagging, paint peeling away in strips that looked like shed skin. The barn was worse. One wall had collapsed inward, and the roof had a hole big enough to drive a truck through. But it was the fields that broke her heart. 40 acres of gray dirt. Not brown, not red. Gray like ash, like the remains of a fire that had burned too hot and too long. Here and there, skeletal stalks poked up. Remnants of Henderson's last failed corn crop from 2009, preserved by the poisoned soil like specimens in a jar. No weeds, no grass, not even dandelions which would grow through concrete if you let them. Just nothing, a dead zone. Maya stood at the edge of the field and felt tears running down her face, hot and angry. She wasn't crying because it was hopeless. She was crying because her father had looked at this same emptiness and seen something else. He had seen potential. He had seen life. And now he was gone, and it was up to her to prove that he hadn't been a fool. I'll fix you, she whispered to the dirt. I don't know how yet, but I'll fix you. The neighbors came on her second day. There were 3 of them. Dwayne Carter, who owned the 200 acres to the east, his wife Linda, and old man Peabody, who had farmed the land south of the Henderson place for 60 years, and claimed he could taste rain 3 days before it came. They stood at her fence line, leaning on the rotted posts, watching her sweep broken glass out of the farmhouse kitchen. "Girl, you got a death wish?" Dwayne called out. He was a big man, sunburned with hands like catcher mitts. That house ain't fit for rats, let alone a human being. Maya wiped her forehead with her sleeve. It's got a roof. Mostly, and the well works. Mostly. The well's poison, Linda said, not unkindly. She was a thin woman with kind eyes and a mouth that turned down at the corners, like she was always expecting bad news. Henderson's cattle drank from it back in '07. They died in 2 days. Bloody foam coming out their noses. State vets said it was chemical contamination. Something from the old plant. I'll get the water tested, Maya said. You'll get dead is what you'll get, Old Man Peabody grunted. He spat a stream of tobacco juice that hit the dirt and didn't even darken it. The ground was too dead to absorb moisture. That land's cursed, always has been. Even before Henderson, the Indians wouldn't camp there, said the spirits were angry. Then the white man came and made it worse with his chemicals and his machines. You can't farm cursed land, girl. You can't love it back to life. Dirt don't have feelings. Maya set down her broom. She walked to the fence. She looked Old Man Peabody in the eyes. Those cloudy, pale blue eyes that had seen 80 years of Oklahoma summers. My father used to say that dirt is just earth that's been forgotten, she said. He said every patch of ground has a memory. And if you remember it right, if you treat it with respect, it remembers how to live. Peabody stared at her for a long time. Then he shook his head, turned around, and walked back to his truck. Crazy, he muttered. Just like her daddy. Crazy. Dwayne and Linda stayed a moment longer. If you need anything, Linda said softly. Food, a shower, a place to sleep that don't have holes in the roof. You come by our place. No judgment. Thank you, Maya said. But she didn't go. That night, she slept on a camping mattress in the corner of the farmhouse living room, wrapped in her father's old jacket, listening to the wind whistle through the broken windows and the rats scratch in the walls. She told herself it was the sound of the house waking up. She told herself that tomorrow would be better. It wasn't. The water test came back on her 5th day, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. Maya had driven the sample to the county extension office herself, holding the jar on her lap like a holy relic, praying that the rumors were wrong. They weren't. The technician, a young man who couldn't have been older than her, looked at the results and went pale. You can't drink this, he said. You can't even bathe in it. The nitrate levels are off the charts. There's benzene, toluene, traces of heavy metals, lead, cadmium, probably from the old plant's waste ponds. This water would kill a horse. Can it be filtered? Maya asked. Not with anything you can afford, he said. You'd need industrial reverse osmosis. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Maya drove home with the test results on the passenger seat, her hands numb on the steering wheel. She had $800. She had a broken tractor. She had a house with holes in the roof and a well full of poison. And she had 40 acres of dirt that laughed at seeds. She sat on the porch that evening and watched the sun go down over the dead fields. The sky turned purple and gold, beautiful and cruel, because beauty like that had no business existing above so much ugliness. She thought about calling Linda Carter and asking for a ride back to town. She thought about admitting that everyone had been right, that the land was cursed, that her father had been a dreamer, and she was a fool. Then she thought about the journal, her father's journal, the one she had found in the box under her mother's bed after the funeral, wrapped in a plastic bag, preserved against time and mold. She had read it cover to cover 100 times, but there was one page, page 47, that she had never understood. Until now she ran inside, dug the journal out of her backpack, and flipped to page 47 under the light of her camping lantern. The Henderson place. September 14th. I found something today in the northeast corner, near the old oak that lightning split in '98. The soil there is different, darker, not gray like the rest. I dug down 2 feet and found something buried. Glass jars sealed with wax, filled with seeds, ancient seeds. The labels are in Spanish, faded, but I can make out the word maize. Not corn like we grow today. something older, something that survived when the world was harder. I took 3 jars, left the rest. I don't know what they are, but I know what they mean. They mean the land remembers. They mean someone loved this dirt before it was hurt. They mean it's not over. Maya read the page 3 times then. She grabbed her flashlight, a shovel, and her father's jacket, and ran out into the night, the northeast corner. The old oak. Lightning split in 1998, she found the tree easily. It was the only thing on the property that wasn't dead. The oak had been struck by lightning 14 years ago, split down the middle, blackened and scarred, but it was still standing, still alive, still growing leaves every spring while everything around it died. Maya fell to her knees at its base. She started digging. The soil was different here. She noticed it immediately. Not gray, dark, rich, smelling of earthworms and decay and life. She dug with her hands at first, then with the shovel, going deeper and deeper, her arms burning, her breath coming in gasps. 2 feet, 3 feet, 4. Then her shovel hits something that wasn't dirt, glass. She brushed away the soil with trembling fingers, and there they were. 6 mason jars sealed with red wax, buried in a wooden crate that had rotted away to splinters. The labels were handwritten, faded brown ink on yellowed paper. She couldn't read the words. They were in Spanish or maybe an indigenous language she didn't recognize, but she could read the drawings. Drawings of corn, tall corn, blue corn, corn with leaves that looked like feathers and stalks thick as a man's arm. Maya sat back on her heels and cried, not from sadness, from something older, something like recognition, like finding a piece of yourself you didn't know was missing. Thank you, she whispered to the dirt, to the tree, to the ghost of whoever had buried these jars. Thank you for waiting. She planted them the next morning, before the sun was fully up, before the neighbors could come and tell her she was wasting her time. There were exactly 48 seeds across the 6 jars. She planted them in the northeast corner, near the oak, in the only patch of good soil on the whole farm. She didn't have fertilizer. She didn't have irrigation. She had a bucket of bottled water she'd bought with her last $20. And she had hope. She planted them in 8 rows of 6, each seed 3 inches deep. Each one whispered too as it went into the ground. Grow, she said. Please grow. Then she waited. The first week, nothing happened. The gray dirt sat there mocking her. The wind blew. The temperature dropped. A late frost came, coating the ground in white, and Maya spent the night outside with blankets, trying to protect the patch, shivering so hard her teeth cracked together like castanets. The second week, she ran out of money. She ate the last can of beans in her pantry. She drank the last of the bottled water. She stood at the edge of her field, looking at the empty dirt, and felt despair wrap around her throat like a hand. On the 15th day, she almost didn't go out to check. She told herself it was hopeless. She told herself the seeds were too old, the soil too damaged, the water too poisoned. She told herself that some things stay dead no matter how much you love them. But she went anyway, because her father had taught her that the difference between farmers and everyone else is that farmers show up even when there's no reason to. She saw it from 10 feet away, a green shoot. No 2, no 5, tiny, fragile, barely visible, but green, living green, the color of hope. Maya fell to her knees in the dirt and wept. She wept until her throat was raw, and her eyes were swollen, and the sun was high overhead. Then she got up, walked to the oak tree, and pressed her forehead against its scarred bark. Thank you, she said. Thank you, thank you, thank you. By the end of April, the shoots were 6 inches tall. By mid-May, they were 2 feet, and they weren't ordinary corn. Maya had grown up around corn. Her father had planted corn every year of her life, yellow dent corn, the standard variety that filled the elevators and fed the cattle and paid the bills. She knew what corn looked like. She knew how it grew. This wasn't that. The stalks were thicker than they should have been, even as seedlings. The leaves were broader, with a silvery sheen that caught the light like fish scales. And the color, God, the color. Not green, not exactly. A blue-green like the ocean on a stormy day. Like the feathers of a bird she'd once seen in a nature documentary about the Amazon. The neighbors noticed. Dwayne Carter drove by one morning in May, his truck slowing to a crawl as he passed the northeast corner. He stared. He rubbed his eyes. He stopped the truck and got out. "Maya," he called. "What in God's name is that?" "Corn," Maya said, trying to keep her voice casual even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "That ain't corn. Corn don't look like that. It's an heirloom variety," Maya said. "Old seeds, very old." Dwayne walked closer. He squatted down, his farmer's eyes scanning the rows with the critical assessment of a man who had spent 40 years judging crops. He touched a leaf. It was thicker than leather, with veins that stood out like cords. "Where'd you get seeds like this?" "My father found them, buried near the oak." Dwayne looked at her. Then he looked at the corn. Then he looked back at his own fields, where his conventional corn was struggling through a late cold snap that had killed 10% of his seedlings. "They're growing fast," he said quietly. "Yes, sir. In dirt that shouldn't grow weeds. Yes, sir." Dwayne stood up. He wiped his hands on his jeans. "My daddy used to talk about corn like this. Blue corn. Sacred corn, said the old tribes grew it before the white man came with his hybrids and his chemicals. Said it could grow anywhere because it remembered the old world. The hard world," he paused. "I thought it was just stories." "Maybe stories are just memories," Maya said. "Memories of things we forgot were real." Dwayne looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once and walked back to his truck. "You need anything? Tools? Advice?" "I need rain," Maya said. Dwayne looked at the sky, clear and blue and cruel. "Don't we all?" June came with heat that felt personal, like the sun had a grudge against Oklahoma. The corn was 4 feet tall by the first week of June, and it was changing in ways that made Maya's agricultural science textbooks useless. The stalks had developed a purple stripe along the inner curve, like a vein of mineral running through rock. The leaves were now fully silver blue, and when the wind blew through them, they made a sound like whispering. Not the normal rustle of corn, something lower, something almost musical. And the roots. Maya dug down one day just to check and found roots that went 3 feet deep in 6 weeks. Normal corn roots don't go that deep that fast. These roots were searching for something, reaching down through the poisoned soil like fingers through water, finding pockets of moisture that shouldn't exist. The well water was still poisoned. Maya knew that. She had tested it again, hoping against hope, but the corn didn't seem to need the well. It was finding its own water, or making its own. By late June, the corn was 8 feet tall, and people were driving by just to look. Cars slowed on the county road. Trucks stopped. Farmers stood at the fence line with their arms crossed, shaking their heads. Some took pictures. Some crossed themselves. Old Man Peabody came by every morning at 7, stood there for 10 minutes without saying a word, and left. Linda Carter brought Maya a casserole on a Sunday afternoon, but she didn't leave right away. She walked into the corn patch, running her hands along the stalks, her eyes wide. "It feels cool," she said. "The leaves, they're cool to the touch. In this heat." "I know," Maya said. "And the soil, Maya, the soil under these plants. It's dark, it's wet, but you haven't watered them in weeks." "I know." Linda turned to her, and Maya saw tears in her eyes. "What is this?" "I don't know," Maya said honestly, "but I think it's healing. The land, the corn is doing something to the soil. Something I don't understand yet." Linda reached out and hugged her, hard. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. So proud. July brought the drought. Not a normal Oklahoma summer dry spell. A killing drought. the kind that turned rivers into cracked mud and made cattle farmers sell their herds because there was nothing to feed them. The county declared a state of emergency. The governor held a press conference. Crops withered across the state. Soybeans curled into brown fists. Wheat turned to straw. Cornfields that had looked lush in June became graveyards by the 4th of July, except Maya's. While Dwayne Carter's corn shriveled and died, while Old Man Peabody's beans turned to dust, while the entire county prayed for rain that didn't come, the blue corn in the northeast corner of the Henderson place kept growing. 10 feet, 12 feet, 14, the ears started forming in mid-July, and they were like nothing anyone had ever seen. Each ear was the length of a man's forearm, wrapped in husks that were pale blue, almost white, with threads of silver running through them like veins. When Maya peeled back a husk to check one, the kernels glowed. Not literally. She told herself it wasn't literally. But in the right light at sunset, the blue kernels seemed to hold light inside them. Like they were made of something more than starch and sugar, the soil around the plants was now black. Rich. Alive. Maya took a sample to the county extension office, not telling them where it came from, and the technician looked at the results and asked if she had mixed it up with potting soil from a greenhouse. "This is impossible," he said. "The organic matter content is off the charts. The pH is perfect. The nitrogen levels, ma'am, where did you get this?" "My farm," Maya said. "What farm?" Maya smiled. The one everyone said was dead. She didn't tell him about the heavy metals. She didn't tell him that the soil test also showed something else. Something the corn was doing that no plant should be able to do. The lead levels were dropping. The cadmium was disappearing. The nitrates were being converted into something harmless. The corn wasn't just growing in poisoned soil. It was eating the poison. The state inspectors didn't come because of the corn. They came because of the satellite. A graduate student at Oklahoma State University was doing a research project on drought impact using thermal imaging from a government satellite. She was looking at heat signatures across the state, mapping crop failure, when she noticed something impossible. In the middle of a dead zone, a 40-acre patch of land that showed up gray and lifeless on every map, there was a cool spot, a green spot, a spot that was thriving while everything around it died. She zoomed in. She enhanced the image. She ran it through every filter she had. Then she called her professor. Her professor called the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture called the EPA. And on the first Tuesday in August, 3 black sedans drove up the dirt road to the Henderson place. Maya was in the corn when they arrived. She was 14 feet deep in a forest of silver blue stalks, checking the ears, listening to the whisper song the leaves made in the wind, when she heard car doors. She walked out, pushing through the corn, and emerged into the sunlight to find 6 strangers standing in her field, staring at her with expressions that ranged from shock to fear to scientific ecstasy. Harold Vance stepped forward. He was 60 years old, bald, with a mustache that had gone white. He had inspected thousands of farms. He had seen every crop failure, every blight, every miracle and disaster that Oklahoma agriculture could produce. He had never seen this. "Miss Torres," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm Harold Vance, State Department of Agriculture. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from the EPA and Dr. Michael Torres from Oklahoma State University. We need to talk." "About the corn?" Maya asked. "About the corn," Harold said. "About the soil. About the fact that our satellite imaging shows this 40-acre plot is the only healthy agricultural land in a 200-mile radius. About the fact that the groundwater tests we just ran show the contamination levels have dropped by 80% in 6 months. About the fact that" he stopped. He looked at the blue corn. "About the fact that this shouldn't exist." Maya looked at the 3 inspectors. She looked at her corn. Then she did something she hadn't expected to do. She laughed. "You want to know the secret?" she asked. "Yes," all three of them said at once. "There is no secret," Maya said. "Just seeds, old seeds. Seeds someone buried a long time ago because they knew the world would get hard. Seeds that remembered how to grow when everything else forgot. Seeds that don't just survive poison, they transform it." Dr. Chen stepped forward. She was young, with glasses and a ponytail, and her hands were shaking. "Miss Torres, do you understand what this means? If this plant can remediate contaminated soil, if it can pull heavy metals out of the ground and neutralize them, there are thousands of sites across this country. Superfund sites, abandoned mines, industrial waste zones, places people have written off as dead forever. If this corn can bring them back, it can," Maya said quietly. "Not because of me, because of whoever buried these jars, because of my father, who found them and believed, because of the land which never stopped wanting to live." Harold Vance bent down. He ran his hand through the soil, black, rich, alive. He looked up at Maya with tears in his eyes. "At 22, you bought the farm everyone said was cursed," he said. "What grew here shocked the state. But I think what shocked us most is you. You saw dead dirt and believed in life. You saw poison and planted hope. You saw a curse and found a miracle." He stood up. He held out his hand. "The state would like to buy some of these seeds, Miss Torres, for research, for restoration, for the future." Maya looked at his hand. Then she looked at the corn. Then she looked back at Harold. "You can have the seeds," she said, "but not for money, for free, because the person who buried them didn't do it for profit. They did it for the day when the land would need to remember how to heal. And that day is here." The story spread faster than the corn. Within a week, the Henderson place was on the evening news. Within a month, agricultural scientists from 6 countries had visited. Within a year, Maya's blue corn was being planted on toxic sites across America. Old mining towns in West Virginia, industrial wastelands in Michigan, lead-contaminated neighborhoods in Chicago. The corn grew everywhere. It pulled poison from the earth and turned it into blue kernels that could be ground into flour, fed to animals, or simply composted back into clean soil. It wasn't magic. It was memory. The memory of a world before chemicals, before poison, before people forgot that the earth was alive. Maya didn't become rich. She didn't patent the seeds. She gave them away just as she had promised, to anyone who asked. She fixed the farmhouse. She fixed the barn. She bought a new tractor with a grant from an environmental foundation, and every morning she walked to the northeast corner of her farm, to the old oak tree, and she talked to her father. "You're not crazy," she told him. "You were never crazy. You just saw what nobody else could see." The neighbors came around eventually. Dwayne Carter planted a 1/4 acre of blue corn the next spring, and when his soil tests came back improved, he cried in his truck for 20 minutes. Old man Peabody died in his sleep that winter, but not before he brought Maya a jar of his own. Seeds his grandmother had saved, beans that hadn't been grown in Oklahoma since the Dust Bowl. He buried them near the oak tree next to the empty mason jars, and he smiled for the first time in 40 years. "Maybe dirt does have feelings," he said. "Maybe it just needs someone to remember it." Maya replied, "The lesson isn't about corn. It's about the things we bury, the dreams we hide because the world tells us they're foolish, the love we hold back because we're afraid of poison, the hope we plant in dead ground because we can't bear to let it die without trying." Maya Torres was 22 years old when she bought 40 acres of cursed land with $800 and a broken tractor. Everyone laughed. Everyone said she was crazy. Everyone told her that some things are too broken to fix, too dead to revive, too poisoned to ever be pure again. They were wrong, because the land wasn't cursed. It was wounded, and wounds heal when someone loves them enough to stay. When someone shows up with seeds and sweat and stubborn, impossible faith. When someone looks at gray ash and sees black gold. When someone hears impossible and plants anyway, the blue corn still grows on the Henderson place. It's 14 feet tall in August, silver blue leaves singing in the wind, blue kernels glowing in the sunset. The soil beneath it is the healthiest in the state. The well water runs clean. The 40 acres that were declared dead are now a research station, a teaching farm, and a pilgrimage site for people who need to remember that nothing is ever truly lost. And if you drive by on a Tuesday morning, you might see a young woman in her father's old jacket, walking through the corn with her hands outstretched, touching the leaves, listening to the whispers. She's not crazy. She's just awake. And the land finally is awake with her.